An advocate for Alaska Native rights. 15-year-old Alberta Schneck was fed up. In the first half of the 20th century, indigenous peoples living in what was then the US territory of Alaska was subject to pervasive discrimination, including segregation from white residents in settings such as schools, stores, restaurants, and movie theaters. So here we need to decide the correct verb, and we are talking about indigenous peoples, right? So we have to use the plural. So they were the subject, they were subject to pervasive discrimination. Schneck, whose mother was Inupiaq, worked at one of them. In her job as an usher, she not only witnessed the segregation of other Alaska natives, but also was obliged to uphold the theater's segregationist seating policy. So here I need to describe the setting in which Schneck worked. And in the previous paragraph, I'm talking about all of these places where segregation was prevalent. So I would say one such theater, right? Because I need to be specific. One of them or one of these doesn't really specify which setting I'm talking about. So C. She not only witnessed the segregation of other Alaska natives, but was obliged to uphold the theater's segregationist seating policy. Now, obliged and compelled, that is redundant. Uphold and enforce is also redundant. And this also is redundant. So the way it's written is the most precise answer. By March 1944, her fury at the system of inequality had reached a breaking point. Schneck decided to act, setting off a series of events that helped encourage dozens of Native Americans to go to the theater and sit where they wanted. Which choice effectively establishes the significance of the series of events discussed in the paragraphs? Okay, so we'll come back to this. Schneck's initial act of protest took the form of a letter that she wrote to the editor of the Nome Nugget, a local newspaper. In her letter, she spoke out against the seating of Alaska natives and white patrons in unrelated sections of Nome's Dream Theater. They're seating in separate sections, right? That's what we're trying to indicate, that there was segregation. Unrelated would not fit the context here because we are talking about separate seating. Disjointed would also not fit the context because we're not talking about capabilities or ideas. We're talking about seating. And withdrawn similarly doesn't make sense. Her public condemnation led to her being fired from her job, but Schneck persisted in openly opposing segregation. She publicly protested again later that spring, sitting in the whites-only section of her former workplace. She was removed from the building. When she tried to re-enter by purchasing another ticket, she was arrested and sent to jail. After her arrest, Schneck was encouraged by a family friend to contact Alaska Territorial Governor Ernest Gruning, who was sympathetic to equal rights causes. Moved by her story, Gruning supported Schneck, securing an apology from the mayor of Nome for her treatment. So he supported, right? We are speaking in the past tense, so will support, none of these make sense. Schneck's influence did not end there. In other words, in 1945, when the Alaska Territorial Legislature was debating an equal rights bill, her experience was cited as a prime example of the unfair treatment of minority groups. Okay, so here I need to decide the connector, and I'm saying that, she secured an apology from the mayor of Nome, but her influence did not end there, right? So I sense a but here. So however would be the best connector. In other words, is used when you're trying to say the same thing in a different way or a simpler way. So that doesn't make sense here. Consequently is not right because this is not a cause-effect setting. And after all does not make sense either because after all is also used to kind of concede a point. Okay, when the Alaska Territorial Legislature bill was debating an equal rights bill, so this part is dependent. I'll have to put a comma and then the independent clause comes, comma, her experience was cited as a prime example. So the full stop is incorrect because the part before the full stop is not a complete sentence. This semicolon is also wrong for the same reason. And her is incorrect because I have a dependent clause, so I need a comma. Her story affected lawmakers just as it had Gruning, and it helped assure the passage of the Alaska Anti-Discrimination Act of 1945. It helped assure the, shouldn't that be ensure? Okay, so we don't have an option that says that. Okay, it helped assure the passage of. So here I don't need any punctuation. So A looks like a good answer. If I put a comma here, I'm creating an unnecessary break in a sentence that is running smoothly. I can't have a colon because the part before the colon is not a complete sentence. And this dash is also not required. The passage of the Alaska Anti-Discrimination Act of 1945, the first piece of US legislation to outlaw discrimination. Should the writer make this revision? Yes, because it underscores the historical significance of this piece of legislation. Yeah, so that makes sense because if we are saying that this was the first time such a legislation was passed, then mentioning that makes sense. So I'll go with A. It demonstrates the importance of anti-discrimination legislation. No, this just talks about the timeline, so not B. And yeah, so I'll go with the yes answer because it's a good choice. Schneck retroactively came to be known as the Rosa Parks of Nome because she had inspired many Alaska natives to refuse to change seats in movie theaters. Only months before the first two Alaska natives were elected as House representatives to Alaska's territorial legislature. By challenging discrimination and asserting, as she did in her letter, that all Americans have the right to sit or go where they please, she played an important early role in advancing equality in the US. Okay. Which choice most logically builds on the information provided earlier? So I'm saying that she inspired many Alaska natives to refuse to change seats in movie theaters. During a time when English literacy requirements prevented many Alaska natives from voting, much as Parks, 11 years later, had inspired African Americans to reject segregated seating on buses. Yeah, okay. And with the support of a governor who fought for civil rights in Alaska after fighting for freedom abroad during the Second World War. So D doesn't make sense because it is shifting focus to another person. B is going beyond context. This literacy and voting is not relevant. C is the best answer because I'm actually talking about why she came to be known as the Rosa Parks of Nome, because her struggle defending the rights of Alaska natives was similar to the struggle of Rosa Parks when she fought for the rights of African Americans. And this also talks about a political success that doesn't fit the context. So C. Okay, and then we have question 4. Which choice most effectively establishes the significance of this? She decided to act, setting off a series of events that helped encourage dozens of Native Americans to go to the theater, influence the community of Nome to elect Schneck as their Queen of Nome, united an outspoken teenager and a powerful politician in the fight against racism, helped inspire the passage of a groundbreaking law banning discrimination in Alaska. So I would like to go with D because I think that really captures what her attempts ultimately led to, right? This law, the passage of the Alaska Anti-Discrimination Act. So that makes sense. Yeah, option A doesn't really make sense because it doesn't capture the full scope of what Schneck accomplished, right? So it went beyond just sitting where you wanted. It was about ensuring anti-discrimination. Yeah, Queen of Nome is fine, but again, that doesn't capture what she set out to do. And this is partly true, but I don't know if this guy was a powerful politician, the governor who helped her. And besides, D is more important. Okay, so let's grade this. D, C, A, D, C. D, C, A, D, C. And number 6, A, C, B, double A, C. A, C, B, A, A, C.